What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to part 5 of the Jericho software tutorial. In today's video, we're going to be taking a deep dive into the Subject to, Hybrid, and Seller Finance tabs that you will find on your workbook. And so these Subject to, Hybrid, and Seller Finance LOI templates, these templates are going to be used to house all of the manual underwriting or the auto underwriting feature, and these templates are then going to get converted into a professional PDF in which your seller will receive as an offer to purchase. In other words, a letter of intent. So let's get started. I'm going to minimize myself here on the screen, and I think this should be sufficient enough. And so what we're going to do is we're going to start off on the Subject to Template LOI, and you'll see here that there's a couple of cells here that are highlighted in yellow. The cells here that are highlighted in yellow in columns A through F, columns A through F are going to be specific for the PDF conversion. And so columns A through F will be your LOI template, and this template will then be converted into a PDF by the macro that's involved. That macro, which is going to convert this template into a PDF, is designated here in green. It'll say convert text to PDF, and so whatever is displayed here in columns A through F will automatically be converted into a PDF, and that PDF will be housed in your Excel Creative LOIs folder. Remember, this is going to be the destination folder path that you had designated originally over in the Master tab. But if we take a look here, we can see here that there's a couple of cells, as mentioned before, that these are in yellow. The yellow cells are indicating to you as a user that there are VBA macros running inside the cell, and so you are free to move the cell itself. If you need to adjust the placement of the cell, you absolutely can move the designated cells around if you need to. There's no issues with that. What you can't do is you cannot manipulate the code which is inside of the cell. So if you double click on the cell, you will see a formula here. It's very important that you keep the formula intact within the cell and that you do not manipulate the cell with it. But you're more than welcome to move the cell placement if you need to adjust the text placement. And so, in other words, you'll be able to customize this template to your liking. And if you want to add any particular text to the seller, I think the easiest way to do that is simply to add a text box. I found that to be the easiest method. So if you go over here to the Insert tab on your Excel, there is a feature here called Text Box, and you can just insert a text box. And that way you can freely move this around and not have to manipulate any of the cell structure placement within the columns and rows of the template. And so that's one method to customize the Excel template. You can insert a text box, or you can do what is shown here under column A, row 39. This will be an example for you to refer to, but you can also write within the cell itself any type of text, and then simply come over to the Home tab and click on Merge and Center. And when you do so, if you do have a long paragraph such as this, it will neatly organize the verbiage and make that into a visible paragraph that all can see. If you take away the merge and center, you can see how everything's going to get cut off. So that's another little note to keep in mind here. So you have two ways to insert text, either through the text box itself, or you can insert text within the cell. Just remember to click the merge and center. So this is a template. The template is completely usable by you as the user. We have some basic verbiage here that you're more than welcome to use for the Subject to transactions. There's a section here called Advantages to the Seller for when they do accept a Subject to offer, and so you can keep this or you can manipulate this to however you want. If you want to include some buyer closing attorney information, you absolutely can, or you could add any other information that you would like. Again, this template is completely customizable, and you can customize this to however you would prefer. If you have any type of credibility or recent HUDs closed, this would be the opportunity for you as the investor or you as the wholesaler to provide that at the end of your LOI, just so that the seller is aware of who it is that they're making business with. If you don't have any type of credibility or recent HUDs closed, don't worry. The easiest thing that I have found through my years of wholesaling and being in the real estate industry, what really goes a long way is simply having a heart-to-heart with the seller. And so if you want to write a small little paragraph indicating to the seller that you are interested in purchasing the property and this would be your first investment, and that you are totally aware that there are other buyers and investors who may be able to offer a higher purchase amount than yourself, you can simply have a heart-to-heart conversation. You can write a little paragraph here indicating why they should work with you as the buyer. I think that goes a long way. You don't need to add any type of credibility if you don't have any. You can simply have a story, a personal story in which the seller can resonate with you about. Now, is it 100% bulletproof? No. But I think that would be a great way to have a connection with the seller. And so that is something you can do. Again, you can adjust the template here however you would like. Columns A through F are your boundaries of the PDF. So anything within these boundaries are customizable. Just remember that when you're dealing with cells that are highlighted in yellow, you can freely move it around. There's no issues with that, but do not mess with the internal code that's within the cell, as we have VBA macros that are running in the background. And so I believe that's everything that's included for the template LOI. Another thing to notice here is that we have boundary lines. If you can see here on your screen, we have these dotted lines here. These dotted lines are indicating the boundaries of the PDF. If you don't see that for whatever reason on your own template, the easiest way to see the boundary lines is simply to grab one of the rows. And if you grab one of the rows and you just expand it ever so slightly and then you move it right on back, the boundary lines will become visible. So that's one way to see the boundary lines. That way you are aware of where the placement of the text is. So for example, here we can see here that we have a placement of text here. It says advantages to the seller, and it looks like it's on page 2, at the very bottom of page 2. I want this to be on page 3. So we're just going to insert a row, and that way we can push that text down. So now it is fixed. So I hope you saw that. So we can insert and delete rows. That way we can get certain text within the boundaries. Do not delete the rows here. That's very important that you don't delete the rows here for the cells that are highlighted in yellow. The cells that are highlighted in yellow, you can change the color of the background back to white. So when you are ready to send an LOI to the seller, please don't send out a subject to PDF with yellow background cells. That's not going to look professional. So simply just click on the cell of interest, click Control on your keyboard, and when you click Control on your keyboard and you hold Control, you can select multiple cells at the exact same time, and then just go over to the background color and switch it back to white. So for right now, it's placed as a yellow background for a tutorial purposes, as well as for you, the user, to be aware of where the VBA macros are indicated within the boundaries of this LOI template. And so another thing to point out is if you go to the file and you click on print, when you click on file and print of the template LOI, you can visually see what your PDF document that the seller is going to receive. You can see what it looks like before you actually convert the text to PDF. So this is a great way to get an idea of what your PDF is going to look like before you actually hit the macro that converts the text to PDF. So we can see here that pretty much everything's in line, everything's within the boundaries. There's nothing here that's out of boundaries. An example of something being out of boundary would be if I were to insert a column here. You can see here that this dotted line just now appeared, and this dotted line that just appeared between columns F and G, this means that the LOI boundary has now changed. And so we don't want it to change. We want it to stay exactly the same as it is. So if that does happen, be aware of where your boundaries are. We can see here that the word current is going to get cut off now because we're not within the LOI boundary. So I'm going to click on the back button here. That way we don't have to deal with that. And since we're here up at the top, we can also see that there's a little footnote here. The footnote is indicating that column A, row 1, is going to be the name of your file. And so this is going to be consistent with all the template LOIs for subject to, hybrid, and seller finance. So this will be your file name. And so it'll have the property address, and then it'll simply say letter of intent. So pretty basic information. The logo is completely customizable. This is simply just a text box with some verbiage. If you don't have a logo, if you don't own a company, that's fine. You don't need an LLC. The logo is simply here to stand out. You want to customize your LOI so that you can stand out from the competition. I personally have a logo whenever I'm sending out offers to sellers. I think that resonates with them, and it adds a little bit of creativity to the offer itself. If you don't have a logo, don't worry, you don't need one. but it does help. So, you're more than welcome to grab a picture off the internet and maybe write something in there that says, "We buy houses." That seems to be a pretty common phrase nowadays. I don't recommend that one, but you can think of something creative and add a logo here that best suits your personality and best suits you, that you can stand out against the crowd, because you have to remember these sellers and agents are receiving a lot of offers throughout the day. So you always want to come off as professional, and you want to present something that looks very appealing. So do your best to do something creative within your template LOIs. And I think that's enough said. I think that's everything in regards to the template itself for this subject to. And if we remember back in part 4 of our video series, we recall that under the cash versus creative tab, the subject to template is pulling data from the first calculator. So all the numerical values that you see here off of the subject to template, that's coming off of the first calculator. And this table is specifically meant as it's going to pull data for subject to, but it's also going to be used for seller finance and hybrid deals. So it has multiple exits. It has multiple ways of receiving data. So for example, the hybrid and the seller finance templates, they both will include this table, because this table, as stated back in part 4 of our video series, this table is going to be a visual representation to the seller, and they are now going to visually see what a cash offer would look like and what a creative offer would look like. So this has dual purposes. That's really the word that I'm looking for. The functionality of this has dual purposes. The first calculator is meant for a visual representation for the seller, as well as for your subject to offers that will be inserted here on the subject to template LOI. And if we go on over to this area of the spreadsheet, we see here something called payment structure and graph. What is this? Well, what we're basically doing is we're telling the template LOI, where do we want to pull the data from? And so we have the option to pull the data from the manual underwriting inputs that were from the cash versus creative tab. So this is for manual underwriting, but we also have the option to change the values to the auto underwriting feature. So the auto underwriting feature is going to pull data from this side. And this is going to be super important. You have to be fully aware that when you select the source for auto underwriting, if you decide to do a automated underwriting using the macros involved under this particular spreadsheet for the auto underwrite LOI, the auto underwrite macros for the subject to seller finance and hybrid, you must go to the SubTo hybrid and seller finance templates and make sure that you select the source as auto underwriting. Very important. So you would select all 3 templates to auto underwriting. And you are doing so because if you are going to create multiple LOIs, automatically you need to tell the macro that's running the background that the input data is going to be received from the auto underwriting macro. And so when we have multiple LOIs being generated, it's going to replace those values from the values that were created here originally. So make sure that when you're using the auto underwriting feature, that you simply go to the template that you want to create your auto underwriting offer and click on the select source and click that to auto underwriting. When you are doing a manual underwriting, such as like cash versus creative, then you would simply go back into here, click on the dropdown, click manual underwriting. That way, the input variables are coming directly from the cash versus creative tab. So super important. Keep that in mind. That will be for your subject to hybrid and seller finance. Again, it's important because when the PDFs are being generated, the PDFs will be completely different for the auto underwriting because we're going from one property to the next property to the following property. And so we need to tell the VBA macro that we need to reset the values that are listed here on the LOI. That's why it's important that the payment structure is set to auto underwriting. But because we're doing manual underwriting, this is what we're going to stick with right now. And you can see here that there's a little bit of a table, so to speak. And this table is just going to be a visual representation for you as the user so that you are fully aware of where these input variables are coming from. So we can see here that for manual underwriting, the cash price is $242 and the subject to offer is $310. So if we go to the cash versus creative tab, we can see here the exact same sell values. Now, if we change this to the auto underwriting is going to be cash price of $315 and a SubTo offer of $350. And if we check on this, then we can see here that it would be row 16, it looks like. So it would be row 16, $315, and then we have a creative purchase price of $350. The auto underwriting will always, these input variables from the auto underwriting will be saved from the most recent macro that was run from the auto underwriting LOI tab. So whatever was run last here, whether it's subject to, hybrid, seller finance, whatever macro was run last and whatever property was run last, then those numerical values will appear here in the auto underwriting. And so if you want to do a manual underwriting, just make sure you have the correct source provided. And so that takes care of that. If I move myself over here to the right-hand portion of the screen, you'll see a little bit of a bonus calculator. This bonus calculator is present on both the subject to, both on the hybrid and the seller finance templates, which we will get to. But we can see here that we have a home appreciation calculator. We have it on all three templates because since we're doing three separate acquisition types, the numerical values will differ because the way that we are acquiring the property is either going to be subject to seller finance or hybrid, and depending on the mathematical underwriting, it's going to affect, how quickly our home appreciates year over year. So you can play around with this. There's a link here for Redfin. Redfin is a great place to get an idea of what the market trend is for that particular zip code on that property. So let's say your zip code is 10591. You would go on the market trend, and on the market trend, you would simply put in that zip code. Or if your zip code is 90827, then you would simply put that into the link here, and it'll give you the market trend for 3 and 5 years. And there's a selection there for single family and multifamily. Always click on single family. That's going to kind of give you a good indication whether or not you're in a good market. And then you would simply, put in the year over year percentage that the property has been going up or down in value. So this is just a bonus little calculator here for you to kind of play around with and kind of get an idea of what your home value will be in X amount of time, especially if you want to do a cash out refinance. So that calculator is present on both the subject to, hybrid, and seller finance tabs. Now, also something to note here is we see here at the very top of the screen, it says designated end of LOI boundary. So what does this mean? Designated LOI boundary. Well, that's indicating to the VBA macro that's running in the background, where do you want the boundary of the PDF to be finished? So right now our boundary is set at F198. So if I scroll down, it's saying that our boundary is going to end at column F, row 198. And we can clearly see that we have a lot of space being generated that's unusable at the moment. It's not being used at all. And so we don't need all this space. So what we could do is maybe we'll just cut it off for tutorial purposes. We'll cut it off at the 98 row. So I'm going to take away that one. And now it's going to read that the boundary is going to be set. The end boundary will be at F98. Remember to always include the column letter before your numerical row number. So now when I click on Convert Text PDF, I'm going to go to my folder path. And when I go to my folder path, let's pull that up. We can see here that it just auto-populated 828 Royal Red Circle Letter of Intent. And this is the date modified date. This is the time of the current time of my computer. So when I click on this file, you're going to then have a professional PDF of which your seller is going to receive. So again, remember that all of this is being automated and it's going to be a professional looking LOI, which will go a long way in terms of credibility and making your offer stand out amongst the competition. Now remember, we said that our row was going to end at row 98. So the last sentence of row 98 was the buyer's credibility. So if I exit out of this, because we don't need this open, we'll minimize this, and we go back on down, we could see here that it did just that it had cut off the PDF at this particular row. So this is perfect. So this is what you would do in the instance where you don't need all this space, right? So in this case, it looks like this was only going to be about 3 pages for a SubTo PDF. when you're ready, you can send out that particular email. So you have the functionality to send out that email immediately with that offer. So if we decide to send out that email, it's going to have that saved PDF here. So here is that PDF that we just converted to the text. You didn't have to go on your computer to find it in the folder path. It's ready to go. And if we try to send an email, but we don't convert the text to PDF first, then the send to email macro will not function. The send to email macro is always looking to make sure that you have converted the text to PDF first. So you must convert the text to PDF first. That way, when the send to email macro is run, it will automatically grab that PDF with the automated template that you have saved in the master tab. So this send email feature will be the second step. The first step is to convert the text to PDF. Step number 2 is send the email. If you try to send the email first before converting the text to PDF, you're going to get an error message because this functionality here is to send out that offer immediately. So that's what it's meant for. And then remember back, I think it was in part 3 of our video series, we were talking about the master tab and the blasting of emails. So remember that in part 3, we had a dual functionality that was going on where we could send out emails on a single basis, but we could also send out emails on a blasting feature, which is over here. The subject to LOIs, this is completely tied to the master tab for row 2. So the subject to hybrid and seller finance, the input data for agent and seller's name, email address, telephone number, property address, and subject line, this is going to be auto-populated on the LOI, which we can see here is the address, but it'll also be present in the email itself. So I'm going to move this over to my second screen here. We're going to go back into the master tab, and then I'm going to show you exactly what I'm referring to. So we can see here that the email address was exactly the same as what you see here in row 2 of your master tab. So row 2 is controlling the single email usage. And so whatever you have filled out on your email address here is the email address that's going to be used when you're using the single email macro. And so that will be auto-populated for you. You can see here that the subject line is exactly the same as column E, row 2. We have the agent or seller's name, which is here in column A, row 2. And then we have the EMD, close of escrow, our contact information, and then the body paragraph. The body paragraph is from the drop-down selection here in column B, row 6. So we're using this particular body paragraph. And so that is where that input information is coming from. This is all being automated for you. So the master tab has dual functionalities. The master tab is holding information for the single email usage, but it's also being used for your blasting of emails. And so the subject to hybrid and seller finance template LOIs, the emails and the LOIs themselves are going to be tied to row 2 of the master tab. And then remember, back in part 3 of the video series, the blasting of emails is tied to row 19 through row 24 with shared inputs. I'm going to maximize this just a little bit more on the text box, with shared inputs from row 7 and row 10. So that concludes the subject to template LOI. It's going to be pretty much the same for a hybrid and seller finance with some slight variations. So for example, for the hybrid LOI, remember that the mathematics then is going to be pulled from the hybrid calculator. So all the calculators that are shown here on this spreadsheet, the subject to, seller finance, and hybrid calculator, the designated mathematics will be pulled and transcribed into the designated subject to hybrid and seller finance LOIs. So the hybrid LOI is going to be pulling the mathematics from the cash versus creative tab here for hybrid, but the hybrid LOI can also be used for auto underwriting, right? So you have the option to change the input variables shown on the screen to be in reference to the manual underwriting from cash versus creative or in reference to the auto underwriting. Just again, remember that when you are auto underwriting, make sure that your template is switched to the auto underwriting payment structure and graph feature, because that is going to be important before you start clicking on the macros here to generate these LOIs automatically. Let's go back into the hybrid LOI here. So a lot of these cells and inputs are nearly identical to the subject to. The only major difference here is that for the hybrid and the seller finance templates, there will be a payment structure to the seller. For subject to, there is no payment structure because the seller is getting all their equity upfront at closing, correct? So for hybrid, this is what we can expect. We can see here that we've already got input variables that are ready to go. We have a nice illustration of the graph comparing the market value and our offer. Remember that the mathematics are based off of the market value of the property, not based off the list price and not based off of what the seller perceives the property is worth. We're always basing the mathematics based off the market value. And so that's how the numbers are being generated. If we go back into I'm going to set this back to manual underwriting. And if we scroll on down here, we can see here that we have a purchase price of $310, principal initial, which is $95,000, balloon is 60 months, total due at balloon $71,000. All this is readable, right? We're going to take a screenshot, and I'm going to go into the cash versus creative tab so that we are all on the same page. And you can see that the information is lining up. So we have purchase price of $310. We have a loan amount, which is the principal initial of $95,000. Remember that a hybrid means that there's an encumbrance associated with this case. There, the encumbrance on the property is $200,000, and that there's still some remaining equity left on the property. Therefore, we're giving them a down payment of $15,000, which is tied to column G, row 6, and then we're giving them the monthly payment of $395. And so that we can see here that the mathematics are being auto-populated for you, whether you're doing manual underwriting or whether you're doing auto underwriting. All this is being done on your behalf. The only thing that you would have to do as the user, as the investor, as the wholesaler, is personalize the template LOI to your liking. You can manipulate the text that is already provided to you, and you can add some character to it and just make it into something that is more representing you as the individual. That way you're able to connect with the seller. And so pretty much everything else here is the same. Well, let's head on over to the seller finance portion, template LOI. This one's going to have a major difference, and I want to point it out immediately. For the seller finance, you'll see here that the higher purchase price here is at $322,000. That's the higher purchase price for seller finance. If we go to the cash versus creative tab, remember this is for manual underwriting, we are basically looking at what is the total profit that the seller is going to receive after interest is applied and after the duration of the term length. In this case, the term length is 5 years. So over 5 years with a 3% interest, the seller will earn $322,000 on the seller finance transaction. So that is why we have a 322 here, as opposed to the hybrid, which is set at 310. That 310 was based off of this cell here, which was looks like it was F4. So why are we doing that? Well, because we want to incentivize the seller and say, hey, we can offer you $322,000 for your property. And then they're going to look at that and they're going to be like, wow, that's very interesting. And then they would scroll on down and they would see that the purchase price now is $285. They would have our down payment, and then at the profit made would be $322. So we're giving them the bigger number first to incentivize them to say, hey, we could offer you $322 for your property over 5 years, or we could offer you $242 in cash. What sounds better? So this is all being constructed in a mathematical approach and a psychological approach as well, where we can really try to get the seller to consider creative finance, because creative finance will always outcompete cash every single time, especially if you're underwriting like this. And if you're, we have a feature here for reverse seller finance, which we will talk about in the masterclass. Super excited to talk about that. Super excited to share how that functionality works for reverse seller finance. But the moment you start implementing that in your real estate transactions, it's really going to change everything. But I digress. You can see here that the template LOI is nearly the same as the subject to and the hybrid. You can customize this. Remember that the cells here in yellow, you can move them around if you need to adjust the text in the surrounding cells. Just don't delete, don't manipulate the formulas that are within the cell itself that's highlighted in yellow. And then, of course, change the background color from yellow to white before you send out your PDF to your seller. So I'll click on the send email here just one more time. The macros are identical for the subject to hybrid and seller finance, but they're specific to the spreadsheet that you're working on. So we can see here that this would be a seller finance PDF. Then that's seller finance PDF. If I just click on that, let's open that up. It may have actually saved it as a subject to because we're using the same property address. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into here. I'm going to click delete. I'm going to minimize this folder. We'll convert the text one more time. We'll open it, and then we'll click on the new PDF that was converted. And you can see here that we've got a couple additional pages that have been added to the PDF instantaneously. And so now we have a seller finance structure that is ready to go. I mean, if you try to manually do this yourself, you're going to be on your computer for several hours trying to do all this manually. This is being automated for you. And then just remember that we do have to reset our boundary line. In this case, it's at, looks like it's column F, row 205. We don't need the extra space. But for tutorial purposes, you can see here that nearly everything is identical. This is all the information that you need to know for the subject to hybrid and seller finance template LOIs. I hope this information was valuable to you guys. If you guys have any questions at all, please leave a comment in the video description below. And I will see you on the next video. Take care.